You said the cloud becomes the brain. The aircraft is in the future just an edge node for the cloud.
Because the passengers are happy to have this connection. But this is it. From my perspective, that's it for the airline. I do not integrate the cloud into my office floor. I integrate my office into cloud.
Where do you see the border between the cloud and the aircraft?
The internet is free. Everybody can go anywhere and call any URL. The aircraft should not do that.
You as an airline should own your software and ecosystem. It will be in some years not anymore a nice to have.
The airlines that do not go this way down the road, they will really struggle with efficiency.
What it actually enables is getting the cloud in and putting the cloud first and driving cabin and airline operations in the air out of the cloud. You are listening to Loaded, talking software for connected aircraft. My name is Stefanie Schuster. I'm here with Rolf Wagner. And the title of today's episode is The Cloud as the Brain. We had this statement in one of the last episodes. You said, the cloud becomes the brain. We also said, the aircraft is in the future just an edge node for the cloud. So what do we mean by that? Let's dig deeper today into those statements and what it actually means for airlines.
Let's have a look on the cloud and what does the cloud have in common? And what does it mean for the cabin and for the cabin infrastructure? The statement that the cloud is the brain is true for almost all digital services we know today. We do have the services cloud-based running, being it a private cloud or being it a public cloud, but it's cloud-based services that actually orchestrate all our business processes. And this is normal. That is a very normal thing to do. You do not have an office where one floor has their own infrastructure, their own server, their own recommendation engine, their own whatsoever. It would look awkward today if this would be the case. When you think connectivity, then it's very popular to say, okay, everybody has a great connection in the aircraft. And it's good for the airline because the passengers are happy to have this connection. But this is it. From my perspective, that's it for the airline.
What do you mean by that's it?
There is no more benefit out of that.
If the passenger would just connect,
watch Netflix,
and do their own stuff.
And do some vibe coding while flying. And the benefit is that the airline has the possibility to connect their cloud, their infrastructure, which they use on board to orchestrate their processes. They have the possibility to integrate the cabin into this, utilizing the connectivity they get. And this is by far more relevant for their business and for their revenue and for their profitability and for their future in general.
I like that you say integrating the cabin into this, because typically it's formulated the other way around. You integrate the cloud into the cabin infrastructure. But actually, it's exactly like that. You're integrating the cabin into the cloud infrastructure.
Yes, exactly. Getting back to those office and the floor, I do not integrate the cloud into my office floor. I integrate my office into cloud. That is the real essence of it. To really think about connecting your aircraft, connecting your infrastructure on board with the cloud. But this is a lot of work to do. Where do we start?
Before we go into the work to do and what is actually needed, where do you see the border between the cloud and the aircraft?
The border between the cloud and the aircraft is very, very similar to usual business processes you have. I would say everything data-driven. For example, you utilize data, you store data, you're processing data. This is for me all cloud-based. When somebody is authenticating, when you have to process a payment, if you are going to integrate, let's say, devices on board that transmit data, this data needs to be in the cloud, needs to be processed and analyzed in the cloud. The devices on board, I don't think, are dumb devices. You do need to have also processing of a device on board. You need to have a service running in a smart trolley and doing the job there, scanning items, calculating what's left, or having a smart oven, understanding if the oven is still functioning right or not.
But do they calculate?
But
or does the cloud calculate?
they need to, for example, calculate the temperatures, and if it goes off temperature, that they turn off or something like that. But all of this data they collect. For example, how did they do the last 3 months? And is there something inside that does not look right? This data needs to go to the ground, needs to be analyzed on the ground. The same for me for taking the entertainment system. So the seatback screen is for me something that needs to care for, that I can scroll and I can watch something, that the usability is right, that the interaction really flows. But the data it's, for example, showing, that is ground-based. That must be ground-based. On the ground, you decide what I recommend to you, where I stop watching, etc. So all of this is actually ground data. So the screen should not care for that.
So real-time decision-making on the ground.
Yes.
I mean, there might be cases where you still need it on board, if I understood you right, with the IoT devices. But you can always ask yourself, what of this can move to the ground and where would I have some benefit? Because on the ground, I have much more power to
Absolutely.
run analytics, to grasp other data, to connect the data.
It's similar to your phone where you have your applications running and they have some power to do something, but they are actually put all of their data into cloud services. This is something where the decision-making process is really alongside. Do I need this decision locally made on the device now, or is it something that also needs historical data, that needs more information? So my total travel journey, having an understanding where I'm coming from, where I'm going to, etc. This should not be decided in the aircraft. That should be decided on the ground. So all of this is cloud-based services.
Of course, we need to state we are talking here about connected aircraft, and we are talking about in which direction we should move. I think we are not yet there, but this is the direction we see. Now, still, if we talk about a cloud-first architecture, we still have topics of losing connectivity, having some kind of need for onboard redundancy. What does that mean for where to draw the line between cloud and onboard?
Yes, I think you definitely need to calculate with that you have a connection loss, that you are flying in a region where your connectivity is not available. You need to have fallbacks, but these are fallbacks. And I think you must be careful with making a decision like, because there can be such a fallback, I need to think everything in a different way. I think you need to really have a look on the use case. Okay, you are 3 hours disconnected. How do you handle this? How do you cache data that you want to transfer? Or how do you make decisions on board without having the cloud behind you? But this is an exception. I would treat this as an exception because it is really something that will change in the future. So the connectivity will get not worse, it will get better. And it's already now impressive. Maybe you will have also at one point different connectivity providers. You will have the providers that provide you in a certain region and in another region not, but it's still an exception. For me, this is all still an exception. You should treat it as an exception and architect it as an exception and not as the main flow.
Okay, then let's move to the cloud side of things. One topic I always like to think about is what is there which has been built and thought through by other industries which you can use now. Because there are tons of cloud technologies which might open up new possibilities for airlines which were not there before. Because typically for onboard software, a lot was built new, reinvented new, just for the aircraft. Let's dig a little bit into what kind of cloud technologies can be leveraged.
What are you thinking about?
Well, I'm thinking about there are technologies like API gateways. There are companies and industries which have thought through how to connect different backend services, how to make sure that you consider different parties will access the APIs. There need to be some security layers. There need to be some performance considerations. If I would like to have on my front-end application some information which requires data from different backend services, responses from different backend services, there is a performance topic to consider to get that
Absolutely.
response fast, especially now if you think about latency and so on. In the cloud, there are such technologies already, how to do that.
Yes. Let's also have a look on this statement. When you connect from the aircraft to the ground, the internet is free. Everybody can go anywhere and call any URL, and you cannot block them, or you should not, and so on and so forth. That's okay. But this gives a little of a perception of everybody goes everywhere, like by himself, and decides it. The aircraft should not do that. When you have aircraft services on your aircraft that connect to the backend, being it running an authentication or transferring data, or very interesting area is avionics data, because you have now a real pipe to the ground. When you get all of this data, consuming data, avionics data, and so on, they should not all call different services. They should not basically have hundreds of entry points. If you are considering to really orchestrate that, you use something exactly like an API gateway, like a federation layer, where you know who is actually calling your services. And you're basically use an API gateway to integrate your services within the company. This makes it a bit easier for you to not have so much service-to-service communication. So if one service needs information from another, an API gateway could make this easier to handle. Services that sit behind this gateway in the cloud would easier trust the connection because it's your API gateway that actually is integrating the services, and you can integrate third-party services with that. So you could also say, if you use a third-party service for recommendation, for example, or for data analytics, you could also route this over an API gateway. That is something which gives you more control. You understand the request to your different services. You can use it to join your services in an easier way. And you can integrate partners into this infrastructure. And this gives you more resilience regarding the connection between the aircraft and the ground. This is one aspect of it. Now, the next aspect is what kind of partners, what kind of services would you actually integrate into that?
Yeah, because all this opens up the possibility. We touched that in one of the episodes already, that you can integrate very specialized software services. There are tons of companies out there developing such very specialized services for kids, for accessibility, for recommendations, for whatever, which is you as an airline should own your software and ecosystem. I still believe that owning also means deciding what kind of partnerships to choose and partners to integrate for such specialized use cases. Not to own the infrastructure, not to own the vision and the whole ecosystem, but add specific functionality where you as an airline benefit from somebody really specializing in this specific field.
Yes, and this is something that is, if you look in the past, if you look at the cabin, and you look, for example, you made recommendations within the cabin, you did this with software that was running into the cabin, if you did it at all, but it was something that was running into the cabin, so you needed to have a knowledge how to get software there, et cetera, et cetera. Actually, these companies who did recommendations, or try to, were not companies whose main job is thinking about how recommendations work, how to integrate AI into that, et cetera, et cetera. Companies that do recommendations and specialize on this and on data analytics and on AI integration are typically cloud services, and they are rather agnostic to an industry. They may serve the travel industry, but not necessarily somebody sitting in an aircraft. So such services are by far more straightforward to integrate when you do this out of your cloud. When you're adding these services, like you say, you look for the specialized company into recommendations. not into a specialized company knowing how to run a service on board of an aircraft. If you are doing the connection from your cabin to the cloud, right, if you set up the infrastructure in the right way, then it will be much easier to integrate such companies within your infrastructure. Also to integrate your own systems, your booking systems, your upgrading systems, etc. It's also easy to integrate them. And even whether you collect your flight data, how do you do your electronic flight bag? Also, this gets easier if you are able to use the pipe.
Which is already done more strongly for ground operations. I mean, there in the last few years, airlines moved already more strongly into cloud ecosystems, cloud infrastructure. Now, what if an airline is not really set up for that yet and does not feel ready for that? What's the minimum or what to do if you as an airline are not yet into a cloud setup?
It gets again to the question of starting with an holistic picture or starting with a use case. I would rather say build up first the right infrastructure. So having a look on what kind of cloud services would you want to do, and then building up, for example, the accessibility to your cloud infrastructure to store data, to analyze data. Maybe start first with analytics tools, start first with what kind of data would you like to collect on board, being it passenger data, being it consumption data, being it maintenance data, being it crew information. So getting this data to the cloud and then building processes to analyze it, to understand what you get there. And from there, you can then expand. From there, you can add other services to it. You can look into entertainment services. You can look into booking services. You can look into onboard ordering services. You might start with something that is nearest to you. So if you have onboard point of sales, you can think about, can I do this over a cloud service? If you have all of this is, you need a connection for that, right?
Yeah, and it will be in some years not anymore a nice to have. Right now it might feel like a nice to have. You can still survive without. If you don't feel ready, if you don't have the people for it, if you don't have the budget for it, then okay, let's go without the cloud for now. It won't be like that in the next few years because the airlines moving ahead with that will have quite some competitive advantages in efficiency, in how they run their operations, in how they can serve the passengers and keep the passengers engaged, know the passengers, use the data they have. So right now it might feel like it's cool because you can do cool things there. But probably in the next few years, it is really needed to keep your competitiveness. Even if you need just a few people, just a little budget, get started somewhere just to start setting up this infrastructure.
The airlines that do not go this way down the road, they will really struggle with efficiency. They will lose the data and they will lose the processes they need to be more efficient and to serve to the point. And this will make it very, very hard for airlines to stay competitive. Even starting small, having first experience, basically creating a round trip, having some process on board that you transfer to ground, that you handle on the ground, is something that will give you a competitive advantage. And you do not need to start with everything at once, but I think you need to really get experience with it after your passenger can watch Netflix. That's very, very important.
How is it for the different kind of airlines? We have the very large ones. We have the low-cost carrier, ultra-low-cost carrier, mid-size ones. How do you see this?
You can already see today that all of them make decisions for the connectivity that allows them to be that efficient. So all of them are going this way down the road. They might have a different focus, but they will all need to do technically the similar thing. The one might have a focus on the passenger engagement. The one might think about I turn my seatback screen into something that makes it super personal for me to be on board, so that I can understand where my next gate is, that I can understand if I can upgrade my next flight, that I can enjoy entertainment, that I can even choose my own login to my streaming. Maybe all of this is cloud-based services you can offer to please your passenger. And with this, to increase your revenue, because it's more likely that this person is booking the next flight with you. Now, if you're looking at a low-cost carrier, they might really look at efficiency. They might really look at avionics data, getting avionics data to the ground, understanding their aircraft, understanding if there need to be some maintenance done, understanding that how they can make the turnaround more efficient. This is something that I believe maybe the focus will be a bit different between the carriers, what they process and what they do on the ground. But I don't believe that there is a separation between, oh, the one does not need it and the other needs it. No. Also, low-cost carriers are highly digitalized and have a lot of digital processes. I think
Sometimes
that's
even more,
crucial.
because they
Sometimes
have to,
even
because
more.
they put their strategy on that.
Exactly.
Efficient, be lean.
Yes. So I think that it's relevant for all the carriers.
Okay, what does it mean for the onboard side?
Yeah, I think the onboard side is probably the most tricky part of it, because the experience we have right now is you get the terminal and your access points, and that's basically it. So the first easy to access person is me with my own device connecting to this access points, and that's it. Right now, the cabin infrastructure is kind of not into this picture on the onboard side. So you need to think about, how do you connect this? How do you get your screens connected that the passenger are engaging with? How do you get your IoT connected? How do you get your avionics data connected? The first thing is to look at the different devices you have on board. And I really would look at them as an infrastructure with devices. I would not distinguish an oven from a seatback screen, because you need to think about an infrastructure where your oven and your seatback screen is in a similar way connected, can authenticate themselves as a device and transfer data over a connectivity pipe. And this needs to work for your crew app. This needs to work for your oven. This needs to work for your lights. This needs to work for your seatback screen. This needs to work for the personal devices which are working today. To design an architecture like that, I think that is a crucial thing to look at, so that in the end you can really connect every single device, get data from every single device through a defined pipe, through a defined architecture. Not that everybody starts to somehow put the data together and transfer it somewhere. I think that is something which probably will not lead to a lean, straightforward infrastructure, right?
So ideally, the teams working for onboard use cases in the future should first ask, what does your cloud support? Before they start thinking about what to build on board and how to connect it.
Yes, that's crucial. It's crucial to think about, how do you make the infrastructure work? You need to think your devices, your software devices, in two layers. So the first layer is how to connect all the devices with each other, how to make them all interoperable. And then you think about, okay, on a seatback screen, I need what? Entertainment, booking, passenger information. What do I need on my personal device? I need to be able to pair it. I need to be able to execute payments, authenticate. Now this I can also connect through the cloud. The crew needs applications they are operating. The IoT devices need applications that they are functioning, but also that they are transferring data and connecting to the cloud. And on the cloud side, you are basically accumulating all of this information. That is the way to go, and this is the way how you need to think a cabin. And if you have a server in the cabin, if you have screens in the cabin, being it screens that are in the galley, being it screens in front of passenger, if you have IoT devices, smart seat cushions, you name it, they all need to work on one infrastructure. And this is important to design. I'm right now not really sure how to do this, because right now this is separated, this is structured totally different. Now there are devices and networks that are put together as one box, and this is a box called XYZ. That's it. And you have no idea how they are intercommunicating, how they are exchanging data. This is super proprietary. And then you have the next box of maybe some IoT stuff, and then you have the next box of crew. And this is something that is not really smart to do, because it's the airline cabin and it's owned by the airline. So you would not design it like that. And you need to have, first of all, an architecture that is connecting, building the network. And after that, you're thinking about, do I need an app that does entertainment? Yes, sure. Then build it on top of this network.
It will also be interesting to see how the connectivity providers will be involved in this game, what they offer. Seeing now already Starlink, Amazon Leo positioning differently on the market.
Absolutely, but maybe the one goes more into direction to say, I already offer you some infrastructure that allows you to build this infrastructure layer. The other might say, here is the connection, there you go. But in both cases, you do need to build your infrastructure. Maybe with the one, it's a little bit harder, but you have more freedom to do it. The other has a more minded setup, how exactly you should do it. But both are interested in building an infrastructure, a one-layer infrastructure into an aircraft, how to connect devices and how to collect data. And I think that is the important way to go. Now, which one you choose, that is more your preference, I would say. Like does not necessarily change the thinking on the common infrastructure on board of an aircraft.
But it's also, when we come to the conclusion, one topic is here going for cloud first, thinking architecture and infrastructure already always with the cloud as the brain in mind. It's also interesting to see that LEO connectivity enables that. When we talk about LEO connectivity, it's often about the connectivity. The passenger is connected. We talk about bandwidth, latency. But what it actually enables is getting the cloud in and putting the cloud first and driving cabin and airline operations in the air out of the cloud.